Welcome back to another episode of the Athanasian Forum podcast. I know it's been a while. I was kind of taking some time. I've been trying to kind of think what kind of content I want to do because I don't feel like I've been very focused. Uh, and so I want to try to focus a little more just talking about different things I'm reading. Maybe write some stuff again. Kind of debating about that. But I'm definitely going to probably keep up with some of these videos and whatnot. But the reason I had this idea come to me, and I was like, okay, I need to get back into the groove of doing some stuff because I do like producing content. For me, it's somewhat therapeutic, I guess you could say, but it's just fun to put this together. It gives you a project, especially some people just it's just fun to have a project, and for me, this is it. And I would love to continue to. I like to put some effort and work into this and see it grow, maybe, but at the end of the day, I'm doing it because I want to do it, and that's what matters. I'm doing it for fun. I don't want to call myself an autodidact, but I do love to learn, and this is always a pleasant way to learn. Um, so today's episode specifically, I'm doing because today is December the 6th. Now, I'm sure most of my audience doesn't know what today is because the Protestant Reformation doesn't like the saints very much, and so they said, let's get rid of them. Well, it's not exactly the attitude they had. They just didn't like. They thought veneration and worship were the same thing, which is they're not. But that's another story, another discussion. So in the Reformation, a lot of saints, the lives of the saints, those kinds of things kind of got done away with, for good or bad. That's kind of where it's at now. But today is the feast of St. Nicholas of Myra. And so I decided I'm going to make a video specifically discussing who he is and kind of what he means. I'm gonna dive into it because most people don't know about St. Nicholas of Myra. A 4th century saint. So we're going to talk about who that is, but I want to talk about start first with the modern mythical figure of Santa Claus. You better watch out. You better not cry. You better not pout. I'm telling you why. He's making a list and he's checking it twice. He's going to find out who's naughty or nice. He sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. He knows if you've been bad or good, so be good for goodness sake. Because Santa Claus is coming into town. And that's the fun little the little saying, and those are the things that we think about Santa Claus. He's that mythical figure in some ways. Another good song is Dasher and Dancer and Prancer and Vixen, Comet and Cupid and Donner and Blitzen. But do you recall the most famous reindeer of all? Of course, we're talking about Rudolph there, a song that became popular by Gene. It wasn't written by Gene Autry. I think it was a poem or a movie first, something like that. And then he popularized it in a song. And Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer went down in history. But so what we have at Santa Claus is first off, the mythical figure is somebody that comes on Christmas Eve, leaves presents to all the children in the world if they've been good. If they've been bad, they don't get it. So he is an interesting figure here in America. He's very much popularized. He's a big, large, fat man. I mean, just imagine, if you guys know what I look like, I'm pretty overweight and obese technically. So, no hiding that fact. That's just what it is. But, just imagine me, except I'm old. I have a long white beard and white hair, and I'm in a red suit. So that's kind of what it is. No, I'm just kidding. I don't think I look anything like Santa Claus. But no, he's got this ethos around him. He's got these mystical powers and stuff. He sees when you're awake, and when you're asleep, he knows if you've been bad or good. He kind of almost omniscient, so to speak, powers, and that's really interesting, so to speak. But we also have, he's got other he's got all these different things. He's such a facet. The modern Santa Claus, he is a truly mythical figure. I mean, it's Santa Claus. You tell your kids about him. Oh, so you better be good. Santa's gonna come visit you, and if you're bad, you get a lump of coal. So we all know this modern mythos, and it's really interesting to dig into the history of where Santa comes from, because over time things have changed, and definitely the Protestant Reformation had a big impact and how his image changed and how Santa Claus came to be today. But it's interesting. It was actually almost in some sense a failure of Protestants to get rid of the saints that really made kept him around in some sense because he was such a popular saint. Saint Nicholas of Myra was, who is the basis of the modern Santa Claus, and it's miraculous almost in some sense because he was so popular that you couldn't even get rid of him. He's after the Most Holy Lady, Mother of God, Mary, and probably John the Baptist. He's probably the most popular saint in the world in the Christian church, in the Christian religion. So it's interesting. He kind of develops, one of the first poems that really gives the modern mythos of Santa Claus himself is actually titled "A Visit from Saint Nicholas," which is written by Clement Clark Moore in the early 1800s, I believe, and it's more popularly known by "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." And it says, "'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. And the stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. The children were nestled all snug in their beds, while vision of sugar plums danced in their heads." And I'll stop there, but that's kind of the first few lines of the poem, kind of gives you the idea. I think we're all familiar to some degree with that. This is what first introduced the reindeer and their names. It talks about his white beard, his white hair and everything. It talks about his bowl full of jelly. His stomach has a bowl full of jelly. So these images that were more popular. This is the first really almost modern view of Santa Claus, and I believe it was, what was it? There's at one point he had, that was kind of the mythos of him visiting on Christmas Eve, leaving presents for the kids, them bad or good, the reindeer. That's the first real view of that. That idea of popping up. But he didn't get the red suit until I want to say the late 18th century. Yes, it was Thomas Nast drew on Moore's poem to create the first likeness that really gives us our idea, our image of Santa Claus today. And that was in 1881. It was for Harper's Weekly. So, he was a rotund, cheerful man with a full white beard, holding a sack laden with toys for lucky children. So it's that kind of image that we get. It also says here, I'm taking this one from thehistory.com. So, these are things you can look up yourself. This is just general information. I try to take from various sources. So this isn't the most scholarly research. But I think some of it's based on scholarly research. So, some of it is not the Santa Claus stuff. I'm not, because we all know about that. I'm not really too worried about that. But, and that's kind of, he also, Nast also introduced, Mrs. Claus, the elves, the North Pole Workshop. So those kind of things also come in with his depiction of Santa Claus. So that's, we see basically the modern idea is really starting to develop at the beginning of the 19th century. So the 1800s. And then, see it continue to develop into the late 1800s. And into the 20th century, still developing. Again, Rudolph didn't come around until right around 1949, I believe, or maybe the late 30s. I can't remember, something like that. And then the song came out in 1949, popularized it. So definitely very, still always moving and shifting with our times. Any of you that are familiar with advertising know he's the Coke mascot. Really is. Or if you watch, I like my favorite take of a modern. There's two modern takes of Santa Claus I really like. Obviously Tim Allen's Santa Claus, really great depiction, really family friendly, fun. I like it. It's nostalgic at this point. It first came out in the 1990s, and about 10 years later they added a couple more films. They're still really fun, even if they're not really great, like necessarily the fantastic, like Oscar worthy movies or anything like that. But it's interesting to see. The other one I really liked is actually the Christmas Chronicles, and they just came out with another one this year. It's starring Kurt Russell, I believe. Is that right? I can't remember. I think he plays, and he says in the first one he says, they're like, Santa, man, you don't look like, he's like, like that you do in the pictures, and it pans to a picture of a Santa Claus in a billboard, and says, like, yeah, they had 80 pounds in all the pictures. I'm not that fat. And he's kind of got this like almost leather suit, and it's a modern image, and he's got this swagger about him, and he's just really really well done, I think. Really well played by the actor. I believe it is Kurt Russell. I could be wrong. I'll pull that up real quick. But it's just these are fun little things. They're not like they're not supposed to be so formal, and it's just very interesting. Let's see, pulling this up, but yeah, I mean, they're not supposed to be like these great A films, but they're fun, they're family friendly, there's something you can show the whole family, you all laugh. And I was right, it's played by Kurt Russell, and his wife, Mrs. Claus, is played by Kurt Russell's actual wife in real life. I can't remember her name. They're an older couple. I'm sorry, I'm young, I don't know old movie stars as well, unless they're really popular like Kurt Russell. So, but his wife plays Mrs. Claus, and it's just a really cute family flick. They came out with the second one, which wasn't as good as the first. Most of the time the sequels never are. Especially when you make an entire sequel trilogy. But that's beside the point. For all the Star Wars nerds out there, yeah, they'll appreciate my comment for the most part. So we have Santa Claus. We have this modern idea. He is a man that gives gifts on Christmas Eve. He's, in some sense, a little bit of a judge of character. He looks at whether you've been naughty or nice. He's omniscient in a certain way. But he's a kindly, grandfatherly old man that is magic, can travel the whole world in one night, delivering presents to every child in the world that, has kind of, quote unquote, earned them in some sense. But usually, I mean, Santa Claus is obviously, well, if you have any kids in the room, you might ask them to leave now. I'll give you a couple seconds. Okay. If you could take the second to pause. But Santa, we all know Santa's not real in the sense of actually delivering the presents. You parents pay for those things and you hide them under the tree. But some parents don't do that. I have one of my friends. He's a new father, and he says we're not doing the Santa thing. It's ridiculous. Which, it is what it is. But I think it adds something to childhood in the sense of, it's, and especially if you're doing it right. I don't think Elf on the Shelf is the way you do it right. But I think, the Santa thing, it's about, benevolence. It's there's so many different facets of it, but it's about a generous, old man. He's supposed to be almost like a god in some sense, for some people. And I think that's true. I think that's why he's got this modern mythos so great. He's this kind old man. And this is what really a lot of people in America really do think about God in some sense. Santa Claus is basically God. He makes a great comparison, and that's probably he makes a great comparison to the moralistic therapeutic deism that a lot of people in America believe in. And it wouldn't surprise me if this does develop in some degree out of our conception of Santa Claus, because we teach children so much, or we give them the whole Santa Claus myth, but then we also we also when younger, okay, maybe not our modern ear, not my modern ear, but for me growing up, I went to church a lot on Christmas Eve. Although that kind of waned with the years, it's not very popular to do Christmas Eve services some places anymore. And probably not a lot happening this year either, but people that were raised in the church, it was like, oh, you had Santa Claus, and you also had the church story, and you had the nativity, and so those are important parts of our church life, I think. But when those kind of get mixed, and it becomes easy for kids to confuse some stuff sometimes, I think, if it's not explained right. But then again, most people eventually grow out of the Santa Claus, know he's not real, so. Some people would say that when we're kids, we all buy into God, and then we don't. A lot of people don't grow up enough, and because God's just a figment of our imagination. But whether we can prove God or not, which I don't think we necessarily can. I don't think we should, because at the end of the day, I don't think you can get around the. I don't think you can just prove. I don't think that's the point of God at all. I mean. That sounds bad, but I think God's a person to know. But there's a lot of bundle of that, and I'm going to avoid that rabbit hole. But I think, I'm a personal believer that myths and stories are a great way to help our kids understand real principles. And in some ways, we have to be careful not to let Santa Claus, this modern myth that we compared, um, not let him become our understanding of God. Which I don't know if that's not anything I necessarily think is happening per se with kids, but it is an interesting comparison. And when you really think about it, that Santa Claus, in some sense, is kind of our moralistic therapeutic days. I mean, he gives us what we want as long as we're generally good, we do the right things, and he's going to give us what we need. He's going to take care of us, make sure we have money and have all these things, and he wants what's best for us, kind of. But there's no real requirement of sacrifice on our part, of course, other than just try to do good stuff and be a good person, which is always ill-defined. What does it mean to be a good person? And so it's interesting to compare those two, but I'll leave it there on that front just because it's interesting. Now, so we've talked about Santa Claus in the modern myth. I mean, we all know the modern Santa Claus, so I don't want to spend more time on that. But I do want to dig in to where he's derived from. Now, I will say the myth of Santa Claus actually first originates. We'll go back to the Protestant. Let me go. I want to dig into the actual roots and show how it develops and how we get to where does Santa Claus come from, because he does actually develop from the tradition of Saint Nicholas of Myra. And to understand that, let's talk about Saint Nicholas. Now, the only thing we really know about Saint Nicholas for basically the only thing we can verify as fact through DNA testing, actually. Surprisingly, it wasn't DNA testing; it was age testing of one of his relics. St. Nicholas's relics, was that he is basically a bishop from the 4th century. That's about all we can absolutely 100% verify. But I don't think that's the point of a person like St. Nicholas. Just like I don't think these other mythic figures, whether it's people like Odin and Thor in the Norse tradition, or obviously in the biblical tradition, you have people like Moses or Samson. Or David, these are in some sense mythic figures, just like Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel. These are in some sense mythic figures, but Christians believe they're real, and I believe they're real too. But that's not the point of somebody like St. Nicholas, and that's the thing I'm trying to say, is he's got a lot of mythos around him that is both spiritual, that has grown out of him, and today we have very different than what was originally was. But St. Nicholas of Myra, we know he's a 4th century bishop from Lycia in the city of Myra. Now there's a lot of different stories. I want to leave the telling of his life as it has been passed down for later on. But for right now, I want to talk about what we do know. And I'm taking this from the Catholic Encyclopedia. This entry right here, just because I try to use a variety of sources. So Catholic, and I have the Orthodox source I'm going to use is from later. I also have Britannica pulled up too. So I mean, like I said, these are sources you can find on the internet. It doesn't take a lot of time to really search these. But I thought it'd be interesting for us to sit down and talk about it. And I think some people just don't take time to read this stuff. And it's because it's not that important. And that's okay. I'll be the nerd and do the research for you. Or at least the 5 minutes of research if you're really lazy and don't want to look it up online. I mean, it doesn't take a lot of work to Google. But so basically, he was the bishop of Myra and Lycia. He supposedly died. St. Nicholas supposedly died on the 6th of December in either 345 AD or 352 AD. Again, we're not 100% certain, but we do when he lived and when he died. He really is probably practically the most popular saint outside of the Most Holy Theotokos Mary and John the Baptist, and of course Jesus Christ, and the apostles too. But he's incredibly popular, not just in the modern era, but throughout history. He is. I think the source here talks about how Justinian in the 6th century had erected a cathedral over in Constantinople in his name. And he was already a popular pilgrimage shrine by that time too. I mean, so this is just a couple, up to 200, 250 years after his death. He's already a major, very popular saint. They're already building churches, naming them after him as their patron saint. And so he's very popular time. He continued to be popular into the Middle Ages, both in the East and the West. I mean, so there is a lot of legends surrounding what he did. But I think the general points of what we know of, basically what the general history and the general story about who he is they think he was probably born in Patara, a city of Lycia in Asia Minor. And in his youth, he made a pilgrimage at some point to Egypt and Palestine, the Holy Land. While after he returned, he became the Bishop of Myra at some point. And he was actually, and this is an important part, he was cast into prison actually during the Diocletian persecution. Now, this persecution was probably the harshest persecution of Christians under the Roman rule. It was a lot, but it was also the last persecution of Christians too. I mean, it was incredibly harsh and brutal. It lasted for several years, and it was empire-wide. Before this persecution, there was rarely empire-wide persecution of Christians. It was usually only like local persecution. So you have some areas or some provinces. It wasn't usually throughout the entire empire, but the Diocletian persecution was, and it was very brutal. And there was a lot of Christians that ended up falling into, they would end up making the sacrifices, or at least underhandedly, bribe somebody to give them paper saying that they had offered sacrifices. It was actually an issue in the early church of, well, how do we let these people come back into the faith, or are they basically done for? They can't, because they rejected Christ. And so, basically, I think what it was is they basically had to do a lot of penance, in some ways, and very harsh, but because it was a real question. It's like, well, I think it's fair, because the Bible does say, I know what I'm thinking of, but I can't think of what it said, how exactly it worded. But it's basically, before, if you recognize me before, the Father, or before men, I'll recognize you before my Father, or So that's kind of the general, that's definitely not the right quotation at all, but that's the general idea of what it was. I brain farting on that a little bit, but and so this persecution was really bad. There was a big debate, and eventually was resolved, and so whatnot. So St. Nicholas went through this. He was in prison during this time, as the journal story goes. But after the persecution was over, after Constantine came to power, he was freed, and the story that's told about him, the legend or his life, whatever you want to call it, has him attending the First Ecumenical Council in 325 at Nicaea, and many of the accounts also say while he was there, he may have slapped and or punched Arius, a heretic. So that's always interesting to see. And then they also, there's part of the legend goes that basically they're like, oh, you can't be a bishop anymore because of this. But then a vision from Jesus and Mary, the Mother of God, appeared and said, no, this was okay. They basically allowed him to stay a bishop after this. But that's part of the more wider legend, that he slapped Arius. So that's basically what we know about his life. And then after this, he was known to be very generous, lived a life of a true saint in his own life, recognized, which is an important thing. If you recognize a saint when you're still alive, you must be doing something pretty good, or at least look like you're doing something pretty good. But after that, and the council, and I see that the only other thing, then he passes away, and it said, I think it was 345 or 352. So that's kind of what we know about his life. The only other thing that we do know for pretty much a fact about St. Nicholas of Myra, other than that he's a bishop, that we can guarantee, was that in 1087, and I find it interesting that the Italians that the Catholic site here actually says in 1087, Italian merchants stole his body at Myra and bringing it to Bari in Italy. So he's actually sometimes called Saint Nicholas of Bari because that's where his relics reside now. His main body resides now, which is actually famous for having myrrh that comes off his body. Apparently, that has healing powers. Very, very interesting stuff. But that's the only thing that we know, is that his relics were transferred from Myra to Bari in Italy, because the Saracens, I believe, had taken over that part of Asia Minor. It was no longer a part of the Greek world at that time. Under I guess it would be the Roman Empire, technically. If they're the Byzantine Empire, I guess it depends on who you ask. Some people call it the Byzantines. The Byzantines probably would consider themselves Roman until the day the Roman Empire was dead. So the Byzantine is actually a modern conjecture, really overlaid onto it. But at least to my knowledge, I could be wrong on that. So that's kind of what we do know about him. He was a bishop in the 4th century. He was generally born in Asia Minor, in Patara, in Lycia, in which he presiding over as bishop. He made a trek to the Holy Land at some point, and felt that God told him to go back and be a bishop instead of becoming a monk. He was persecuted under Diocletian, being released. So these are general, pretty the bare bones of the story, and I think to some degree these are probably, most of these are probably fairly decent. I think it's pretty plausible he was persecuted under Diocletian. It's plausible he was born in Lycia, in Asia Minor, even in Patara. I mean, I don't think those are necessarily something we should really conjecture from the tradition, just because we don't really have anything else. But at the same time, it's fairly plausible. I mean, most people didn't travel that much, so him becoming bishop in an area in which he grew up in really isn't that far-fetched. So I think that's pretty plausible. I don't think that's anything to really conjecture, say it's completely fake. And it's just not verifiable in some sense, to a degree. We do not know whether he actually attended the Council of Nicaea. The roles of the bishops named, his name does not appear there. But and again, I think the important thing about that is, and I'll get into this later, is what that represents, because that's what I want to talk about going forward. Is what he ended up representing, because what happens is, after he dies, I mean, he's being recognized as a saint. They build a church in Constantinople. Justinian does, very famous emperor. The Codes of Justinian, very famous, and they build a church more, just about 250 years after he's died. So I think his life, whatever you say, we don't know. We may not know the exact details, but we do know, as a matter of just his impact in the world and what he represented. He obviously did something that really resonated with people, not just in his area, but across the Roman Empire. And that's something to be noted, really, because when you look at it, he's really well received. Because I know, in Russia, he's very well loved in Russia. He's well loved in Italy, in Germany, in Denmark, I believe. Is it Denmark? Let's see. I know in Germany. Let's see. Yes, here's under the Catholic site. It says the following places honor him as patron: Greece, Russia, the Kingdom of Naples, Sicily, Lorraine, the Diocese of Legge. I don't know how to pronounce that. I'm not cultured. Okay, I'm sorry. Many cities in Italy, Germany, Austria, and Belgium. Kampen in the Netherlands. Corfu in Greece, Freiburg in Switzerland, and Moscow in Russia. He's very outsized. He's also known as a patron of mariners, merchants, bakers, travelers, children, etc. He's very, very popular, and that's why when I talked about the Protestant Reformation, getting rid of icons and stuff, he still remained popular. He was so popular they couldn't, the Protestant Reformation and their destruction of anything having to do with Catholicism, was actually unsuccessful in actually rooting him out, because he was so popular and so ingrained in the culture. And that's where I want to get at, is he, as time went on, he gets ingrained in local areas and you have local legends. And so that's kind of what we see happening in places like Germany or the Netherlands, where he becomes this gift giver. He kind of gets mixed with some Norse ideas of giving gifts and, good or bad. And sometimes even, So it's very interesting. And so that's where that comes from. And so what happens, how he gets to America and becomes popular in America is actually through the Netherlands. Is the Dutch, basically they had, at one point, the Dutch were the ones that founded New York. When they founded it, it was called New Amsterdam. Eventually the English took over. And so once that happened, it became renamed New York. But still had a lot of Dutch citizens, and he was very popular in the Netherlands. And so they could never really root out Saint Nicholas. And in the Netherlands, he was called Santa Claus. Is one variation. That's what got brought to the United States, and in America, it got kind of revised. Language usually happens. Instead of Santa Claus, it is Santa Claus. So that's how we get him in America. That's his first rival, and he begins to become very popular and celebrated. And even to the fact that for generations, apparently it was tradition that gift giving was given on his feast day, December 6th. So, and the one source I read was that that the giving of gifts was actually what was associated with his holiday, his feast day, December 6th, and that during the Reformation, you had Martin Luther. Some say Martin Luther. Sometimes Zwingli or other reformers. Stuart Wells wasn't as important, but he actually would say, well, we don't want to venerate the saints. So they took the idea of gift giving and applied it to Christmas. Is the general view of that, and so that's interesting that got moved. It was originally Saint Nicholas. It was given, and we'll get into why that is, because Saint Nicholas has some stories, and so and that's where I want to get in. So his tradition is carried on consistently throughout the centuries, and it's very interesting. I'm actually going to read. Let me see. Let me find. Yes. In the East, I'm pulling this off of the Orthodox Church in America. Their site, they have a Lives of the Saints. And they call him Saint Nicholas the Wonder Worker, Archbishop of Myra in Lycia, and he's very well worked. Again, he's called the Wonder Worker, meaning he did miracles, according to him. They have some different things on here. I'm not going to get into some of this because it's not as important. But he was according to this life, this writing about him, he was very gifted in his youth. And it was actually his uncle that was the bishop of Lycia before him. And that's kind of how he got it, I think, or something like that. And it was actually, so this life actually talks about when he goes down to the Holy Land, he gets there, and he actually wants to take up the monastic life. And so he wants to live a holy life, but while he's there, he gets a vision from God and saying, hey, go back, serve the people there, and people will be saved through your work there. People will be saved in the name of Jesus Christ. So he goes back, of course. So yeah. So he returns to his native country. It says, here's the quote. It says, Nicholas, this is not the vineyard where you shall bear fruit for me. Return to the world and glorify my name there. That was leaving Patara and going to Myra. So it talks about his miraculous becoming, how he becomes a successor. His miraculous kind of thing, where it basically said that the electors had basically come together, and then one of them receives a vision. Well, this guy's going to show up. His name's going to be Nicholas, and it's going to be the next person who shows up. And so it happened. Nicholas showed up and says, I'm your servant. And that's kind of what happened. But he's very ascetic, and fasting and praying and all these things are normally associated with saints. As you read the lives of the saints often, if you do, I would actually highly encourage it. Whether you're Protestant or Catholic or Orthodox, or you should. They're spiritual heroes. They're people to look up to follow in their paths, because they're called saints because they did stuff and it was dedicated to the glory of God and Jesus Christ. So I think it's important that we follow their paths too, because they represent teach us what it means to live a Christian life. And that's what I want to get at is some of the legends about Saint Nick are important, not because they're necessarily quote unquote true, they're historically accurate, but because what they represent, what they teach us about how to be a Christian life, and that's what the giving of gifts is about here. Because what it is um, he I'm trying to think. Oh, yes, the story basically goes is there he heard about a man that had three daughters. And this is the story goes. And this is where the story gift giving comes from is three daughters and he was too poor, he couldn't afford the dowry to send them. So on the three successive nights he would sneak by and throw a small bag of money in the window so the man could have his daughters married off, because if he didn't wasn't able to come up with the dowry, he's going to have to sell them into prostitution and slavery. And of course, that's a bad thing. So St. Nicholas, on three successive nights, threw in a bag for each daughter and gave them money. And this is an example of his generosity. They say he was well off with great Christian parents that were kind of wealthy. So he gave away his wealth during his lifetime. And that's kind of where we get the idea of the gift giving. That's where it builds on later on. But another thing in here, and I was reading something from, it was an article titled St. Nicholas in the Battle Against Idolatry. And it's from 2016, and it was written by Father Andrew Stephen Damick. And he talks about how in the life of St. Nicholas, what we see is it actually talks about once he became bishop and after the Diocletian persecution, paganism was still very much alive and well in his area and across the Roman Empire still. It wasn't like Constantine did force conversion for the most part. Definitely him converting himself and other things made it popular to some degree. So a lot more people were like, oh, I'm not going to get killed, or I'm not going to have all my land stolen if I become a Christian anymore. So they're like, oh, I can do this kind of thing. But definitely, so it was easier for people to say, okay, I'll become a Christian. But it still wasn't necessarily popular a ton. At first, anyway, at this point, in the early 4th century, it was during a time of great shifting from paganism to Christianity, actually. And so what Father Andrew pointed out in his article is that in his life, let me see if I can find it. I'm trying to think. It talks about basically he would go around, and here, let me see if Father Andrew has it. He talks about he would go around, he would pray to different, he would go, here he quotes from a source. It says, the saint recognized that these unhallowed precincts are the habitation of the demons who received homage from men who were deceived by the ancestral imposture. Basically, it's saying he went around to the pagan temples, and this is a historic Christian belief. Actually, is that the gods of Greece or the gods of the Romans or other basically pagan gods, they were all basically demons that were posing as these quote unquote heroes or gods or whatever, and deceiving men. And so these were places of demons. So what Saint Nicholas would do is he would go to these pagan temples and he'd pray in front of them, and they like collapse and the demons would be cast out. And that's a very important part of Christianity. And sometimes especially like when you get into Germany and the Netherlands, when you see these myths of Saint Nicholas tied to people like Krampus or Belschnickel, it's these people that are basically kind of like almost inverse, and they're hitting kids and stuff like this. And it's basically these stories represent basically it's these like Belschnickel and Krampus. They represent the demons that used to have power. But then St. Nicholas came along, and he freed the people through his prayers to God and through the work of God, and by his prayers to God, the demons were cast out and overcome. And so these stories often involve the fact that it's actually that Nicholas allows them freedom or something for a night or something like that. And so that's how these demons kind of have power for like a night or something like that. That's kind of the stories. But the point of it is this aspect of St. Nicholas himself represents the power of God in overturning and casting out the evil, and so that's the point. Is Saint Nicholas wasn't just somebody that was generous, but he was also somebody that cared and tried to bring the truth into the world by casting out the demons, by removing the liars, the demons that are deceiving us. Because I think that's when God says love your enemies, or when Jesus says love your enemies too, it's not because. It's because in Christian ideas, there's this idea that our enemy is not other human beings. Human beings are just being oppressed. So they're not really our enemies. So why should we hate? We shouldn't hate our quote unquote enemies. When we think of other people as our enemies, they're not our actual enemies. Other people aren't our enemies. And that's a Christian idea. Our real enemy are the demons. They're Satan. They're the devil. And so those are our real enemies. So when it says love your enemies, it's talking about loving other human beings because they're still humans. They're not the real enemy. And so that's the importance of Saint Nick. He loved humans, but he was casting out the demons. He was driving out the evil of the land. And so that's another important facet of who Saint Nicholas is. And so I think the point of Father Andrew's article, as he talked about St. Nicholas and his work casting out demons and pagan stuff, was that the battle, as it was in Nicholas' time, the battle of casting out the demons by overpowering them is also still our mission, is to still continue to cast out the demons in our world. They're still working to deceive us. And they don't have as much power because Christianity became the dominant religion and it really took over. And so that's an important thing to think of is, a lot of people sometimes in some areas just haven't had that problem because guess what? Christians have blessed the land. They've cast out the demons. Christ has literally, through the power of Christ working through humans, has cast out the evil of this world, has cast out those demons. And so they don't have that power as much anymore. But as society becomes more pagan again, as we reject God and we start being open to other spiritual experiences through like Ouija boards, stuff like that, demons are going to continue to gain more power. And so that's why it's so important as Christians that we honor ourselves and we kind of guard ourselves to some degree about what we allow when it comes to spiritual practices and understanding what's spiritual, what's okay and what's not. Like reading Harry Potter isn't very demonic, not really. Now, you start messing with Ouija board or you're starting to mess with like blood sacrifices, well then that's definitely, where you're going to start opening yourself up to bad demonic activity. And we need to be cautious on that stuff. And so learning in that and being discerning about what's good and what's bad for us and reading what's good and what's bad. I mean, I think a great example for me of this is, it is that I've really tried to stay off the internet more. And I've been I'm doing a lot better, and I'm trying to stay off. I'm not been doing so great the last week or so, but, I think trying to stay off the internet is good because, frankly, you're reading all this stuff, and who knows how realistic it is. Maybe it's just all our fears, and we're just getting the echo chamber effect, and we're just hearing and seeing what we want to see. And sometimes what we're seeing online may be true, may be bad, but I think if we were to actually unplug from the internet and actually do the work of connecting with our friends and our family, our neighbors, we would overcome the problems that we're seeing on the internet. The internet's not a good thing. And so when you get on there, you see all the negativity, whether about politics or about whatever it is, it's really important to what we put in our minds, what we're watching. I mean, Jesus says that the eye is a lamp to the body. That's important. It's kind of anything that comes through the eye. It's where we are visual creatures in a lot of ways, and that's an important thing. And so we need to be careful what we put in. When Jesus is tempted in the desert, he said the devil says, "Oh, look at these raw." He quotes scripture, basically say, "You can make these stones, into to make them into bread to feed yourself." And Jesus says, because he says you can make stones out of sons of Abraham or something like that. I can't remember exactly what the quote is, but basically Jesus' response, and he quotes Deuteronomy, he says, "Man does not live on bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God." And so that's an important aspect here is our focus. And I think this Christmas season, this time of the nativity and celebrating the birth of Christ, we need to be thinking about what we're putting into our bodies. And so we need to be following the example of St. Nicholas and Myra. What are we putting in our bodies? And this is what I'm getting into. The exact historical details aren't as important as a story as what we think they are sometimes. I think sometimes the stories have meanings of their own. They're important for us because they're teaching us something that's very important to what it means to live a Christian life. So when Father Andrew here is talking about his work casting out demons, it's important that as Christians we have to be careful what we let in. So we're not letting demons in, for one, but also two, we're letting God transform us so that he can work through us to cast out the demons. Through our prayers, he can cast out the demons. I'm not necessarily trying to be super theologically accurate in my statements tonight. I'm pretty general, so that may not be the most theologically accurate, but I do believe God works through us. When we choose to work with the will of God, He works through us. It's a very beautiful thing. But that's just the one aspect. I think the other aspect of the gift giving, the fact that Saint Nicholas is known for having given the dowries for those 3 girls. That's very important. There's another story about him trying to help get some Roman soldiers out of trouble for whatever reason because they were falsely accused. And these stories like this, and I think what that represents for us and is important for us is generosity. According to this story, the life and the legend of him, he was born to like a rich family, and so for me, I see that as okay. Nicholas was very holy, very pious, and he was thankful to God that he was given much, and so out of that gratefulness that he had for what God had given him, he gave it away. But also he gave it away because he realized it wasn't that important. The money wasn't what's important because it's not going anywhere. It's not spiritually helpful. And so this Christmas, I think, don't worry about the gifts you get. Like, don't worry how much they cost. Don't worry about the money aspect of gifts. If you're giving something, give it first because you're grateful that you already have something. But 2, give something that has meaning beyond what the cost of it is, because money just doesn't matter in this world. It's not that important. And so if we have money, give it away because we're gonna lose it when we leave this life anyway. So, and that's the idea is for what I'm life and my readings and study of Saint Nicholas and his life, as I've come across, is really one of a person that was seeking God and was transformed by God, and through this transformation, he was able to become an example of what it means to live the Christian life, as well as an example of what it means in this case to be a bishop, a leader. He was a servant to his people. He cared for them. He served them. I mean, by giving them money, by standing in their defense, and in so many different ways. And the miracles that are attributed to him also back up his claims of being a saint. At least in the Orthodox and Eastern Orthodox and Catholic worlds, miracles are kind of help verify it, whether a saint's actually a saint or anything. So that is somewhat important to them. If you're Protestant, you don't have to worry about the miracles so much, but it's about what he represents. It's the symbolism of Santa Claus and Saint Nick. That's what's important, and I think we need to be careful not to take the modern consumeristic view of Santa Claus, of just presents and whatnot. We need to take what are gifts that are worth giving, and I hate to tell it to parents, but clothes aren't that important. Don't give your kids clothes unless you want to buy it. I mean, that's my opinion. I understand that's not possible for some people, but give something that your kids are going to really appreciate. And when I say appreciate, I don't mean like just a toy or whatever. I mean like get like a board game. Especially if you have multiple kids, get like a board game or something like that. Because what that board game is, it's not just the one-time gift. It's something that's going to keep on giving, because that represents time you spend with your family when you guys are all gathered around the board game playing together, or a card game, things like that. Something that's a gift that keeps on giving. Something that's going to allow you to focus on the more important things in life, your time with your family. Something that teaches a lesson or helps them grow or become better people. Those kinds of gifts that their value isn't in the money, but in the meaning behind them. Those are the things that I think we should all be thinking of. And I think on this St. Nick's Day, be thinking about him as somebody that represented somebody that loved God, and that gave his life over to God. And the work he did, whether it was historically accurate or not, it's not that important. What's important is his example he lived, and that we should follow his example. Well, that's all I have for you today on this episode, and I hope you guys have enjoyed my ramblings on Saint Nicholas and Santa Claus and all that stuff. It's kind of gone all over the place, and that's kind of normal for me. But I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you guys learned something, and I hope you guys this Saint Nicholas Day, this feast day, celebrate not just the life of St. Nicholas, but celebrate what Christ has done in St. Nicholas. And that's the important thing. It's not that St. Nick himself is so good. It's that Christ transformed St. Nick and made him somebody And Saint Nicholas allowed God to transform him too, and that's an important thing. And it was only that it was Christ in Saint Nick that is what should be admired, not so much Saint Nick himself, but Christ in Saint Nicholas. Let him be an example to us all this Christmas season and this as we go. And I hope I promise to be putting out more content. I think I have more ideas of what I want to do going forward. So hopefully I'll have something out probably later this month or something like that. I don't want to put out a ton, maybe two or three a month, two or three videos a month, maybe a couple articles. Um, so we'll see. And if you guys are still watching, I really appreciate it. And I hope to see you guys soon. And y'all have a Merry Christmas. If you're Jewish, Happy Hanukkah. I'm not sure of any other. I know there's other holidays, and if you celebrate those, I hope you have a happy holiday. So have a good one.